The rain hammered down on Jacob Isaiah's shoulders as he guided his horse toward the barn, the kind of downpour that turned the red dirt of southern Utah into rivers of mud. And it was then he saw her, a young woman huddled against the exterior wall of his barn, soaked through to the bone, her long black hair plastered to her face, her dark eyes watching him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Jacob pulled his horse to a stop and dismounted slowly, not wanting to startle her. The year was 1878, and this land near St. George, Utah, had seen its share of hardship, but something about the sight of this woman, clearly Native American, shivering in the late autumn storm, struck him deeper than he expected. "Madam," he called out, keeping his distance, his voice raised to be heard over the thunder. "You need shelter." She nodded, wrapping her arms tighter around herself. Her clothes were worn, patched in places, and clearly insufficient for the cold rain that had been falling for hours now. Jacob was a man of 32 years, weathered by ranch work and the harsh Utah sun, but his mother had raised him to be decent, to see people as people regardless of their origin. "Come on then," he said, moving toward the barn door. "I have got a place you can stay. It is warm and dry." The woman hesitated, studying him carefully. Jacob understood the caution. Relations between white settlers and the native peoples were complicated at best, dangerous at worst. The Paiute people who had lived in this region for generations had been pushed onto reservations, their traditional land seized, their way of life disrupted. Trust was not something easily given. "I am not going to hurt you," Jacob said quietly, meeting her eyes. "I promise you that. You can stay in the barn. There is hay, blankets, and I will bring you some hot food." After a long moment, she nodded again and followed him inside. The barn was indeed warm, heated by the body warmth of his horses and cattle, and dry. Jacob showed her to a corner where he kept extra supplies for when he had to spend nights tending sick animals. There was a pile of clean hay, several wool blankets, and enough space to be comfortable. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice accented but her English clear. "I am called Elara Nightwind." "Jacob Isaiah," he replied, touching the brim of his hat. "I will be back with some food and coffee. You get yourself dry." He left her there and made his way through the rain to his house, a modest structure he had built himself over the years. Inside, he stoked the fire in his stove and put together a plate of beef stew that had been simmering since morning, along with fresh bread and a pot of strong coffee. He found an old shirt and pair of trousers that might fit her better than her soaked clothing, and wrapped it all in oilcloth to keep it dry on the journey back to the barn. When he returned, Elara had wrapped herself in one of the blankets. Her wet clothes hung over a stall door to dry. She accepted the food gratefully, her hands trembling as she took the warm tin cup of coffee. "Eat slowly," Jacob advised, settling himself on a hay bale across from her, giving her space. "It has been a while, has it not?" she nodded, taking small bites of the stew. "3 days since I ate." Jacob felt anger rise in him, not at her but at the circumstances that had led to this. "Where is your family?" "Hidden," she said carefully. "In the rocks 2 miles east. My daughter, my son, my grandmother. I came looking for work, for help. But no one in town would even speak to me." That did not surprise Jacob. St. George was a Mormon settlement, and while some were kind, many viewed the native peoples with suspicion or outright hostility. The recent conflicts, the government's harsh policies, had created walls between communities that should have been neighbors. "How old are your children?" he asked. "My daughter is 7. My son is 5. Elara's eyes filled with tears. "They are hungry, cold. My grandmother is sick. I did not know what else to do." Jacob made a decision in that moment that would change his life forever. "Bring them here tomorrow morning, all of them. The barn is big enough. I have got supplies. We will figure something out." Elara stared at him in disbelief. "You would do this, for us?" "I would," Jacob said simply. "It is the right thing to do." She set down her food and bowed her head, and Jacob realized she was crying. He wanted to comfort her but did not know how, so he simply sat there, a quiet presence, until her tears subsided. "I do not know how to thank you," she whispered. "No need for thanks," Jacob replied. "Just get some rest. Tomorrow we will get your family safe." He left her then, returning to his house as the rain finally began to ease. Sleep did not come easily that night. Jacob lay in his bed, thinking about what he had committed to. He was not a wealthy man. His ranch was modest, 160 acres with a small herd of cattle and a dozen horses. He made enough to live on, but supporting 4 more people, even temporarily, would be a challenge. Yet he could not regret his offer. His conscience would not have allowed anything else. Morning came cold and clear, the storm having passed in the night. Jacob was up before dawn, tending to his animals and preparing. He made a large breakfast of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy, packed half of it into a basket and carried it to the barn. Elara was already awake, dressed in the dry clothes he had brought her, though they hung loose on her slender frame. Her long hair was braided now, and in the morning light Jacob could see her features more clearly. She was beautiful, he realized with a start, perhaps in her middle 20s, with high cheekbones, warm brown eyes, and a strength in her bearing that spoke of resilience. "Good morning," he said, offering her the basket. "I figured you would want to bring this to your family. I can ride with you if you want, help carry anything." "That is kind," Elara said. "They will be frightened to see a white man, but if I explain, it will be all right." They set out together, Jacob on his horse and Elara walking beside him, moving east toward the rocky outcroppings that dotted the landscape. The morning sun turned the red rocks golden, and steam rose from the wet earth. It was beautiful country, Jacob thought, even with all its harshness. They found Elara's family sheltering in a shallow cave, huddled together for warmth. The children were thin, their eyes huge in their small faces. The daughter had her mother's fine features, while the son looked more like he might favor his father. The grandmother was elderly, her face a map of wrinkles, her breathing labored. Elara spoke to them rapidly in Paiute, gesturing to Jacob. He stayed back, keeping his posture non-threatening, letting them take his measure. The children pressed against their mother, but their eyes never left the basket of food. Finally, the grandmother spoke, her voice cracked but firm. Elara translated. "She says you have a good face. She says we will trust you." "I am honored," Jacob said, directing his words to the old woman even though she likely understood little English. "Please eat, then we will go to my ranch. You will be safe there." They ate hungrily, but with dignity, the grandmother making sure the children had their fill before taking her own portion. Jacob used the time to rig a travois behind his horse, a makeshift carrier that the grandmother could ride on since she was clearly too weak to walk the distance. The journey back took over an hour, slow and careful. When they arrived at the barn, Jacob had Elara and her family wait while he brought out more blankets, set up a better living space in the barn's tack room, which had a small stove he could light for heat and cooking. He brought buckets of fresh water, soap, towels, and more food. The children, whose names he learned were Emma and Ethan, watched him with wide eyes. The grandmother, whose name was Naomi, settled onto a pile of blankets and closed her eyes, exhausted from the journey. "I will bring medicine," Jacob told Elara, "for your grandmother's cough. There is a doctor in town who is decent. He owes me a favor." "Why are you doing this?" Elara asked, her eyes searching his face. "You do not know us. We are nothing to you." Jacob considered his answer carefully. "My mother died when I was 12. She got sick, Fever took her in 3 days. My father tried to get help, but folks were scared it was catching. Nobody would come. She died alone except for me and my pa, and it broke something in him. He was never the same after. He taught me, though, before he passed 5 years ago, that when you see someone suffering and you can help, you help. Does not matter who they are. That is what makes us human. Elara's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Your mother raised a good son. I hope so, Jacob said quietly. Over the following days, a routine established itself. Jacob would rise early, tend to his ranch work, and check on Elara's family. He brought Dr. Marcus Sullivan, an older man who had come west for his health, to examine the grandmother. The doctor provided medicine for her lungs and asked no questions about why Jacob was harboring a native family, though his approval was clear in his eyes. Elara, for her part, refused to simply accept charity. She began helping around the ranch, mending fences, feeding animals, cleaning the barn. She had a way with horses, Jacob noticed, a gentle confidence that the animals responded to. Emma and Ethan, as they grew less frightened, began following Jacob around like puppies, fascinated by everything he did. Where is their father? Jacob asked one evening as he and Elara worked together to repair a broken stall door. 2 weeks had passed since that rainy night, and he had been curious but reluctant to pry. Elara's hands stilled on the wood. Dead. 3 years now. There was a dispute over water rights. Some white ranchers accused our people of stealing. There was a fight. Many died. I am sorry, Jacob said and meant it. It is the way of things now, Elara said, but her voice was heavy with grief and anger. Our lands are taken. Our people are pushed to reservations where the land is poor and the promises of the government are lies. My husband wanted to stay, to fight for what was ours. It got him killed. Is that why you left the reservation? The agent there is corrupt. He steals the supplies meant for us, sells them for profit. People are starving. I thought if I could find work, send money back, it would help. But no one will hire a Paiute woman. We are invisible to your people unless they want to hurt us. The bitterness in her voice was justified, Jacob knew. He had heard stories, seen evidence of the mistreatment himself. You are not invisible to me, he said quietly. Elara looked at him then, really looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding, a connection that Jacob felt in his chest like a physical thing. The moment was broken by Emma running into the barn, chattering excitedly about a bird's nest she had found. But Jacob could not shake the feeling, and over the days that followed, he found himself increasingly aware of Elara's presence, the sound of her voice, the way she moved, the rare occasions when she smiled. He was falling in love with her. He realized with a start one morning as he watched her teaching her children their letters in the dirt outside the barn. It was foolish, he told himself. Impossible. The world would not look kindly on a white rancher and a Paiute woman. There would be consequences, perhaps dangerous ones. But his heart, it seemed, did not care about practicality. Winter began to creep into the valley, the nights growing cold, frost appearing on the grass in the mornings. Jacob could not in good conscience keep Elara's family living in the barn once the true cold arrived. He spent several days thinking, planning, and finally made a decision. Elara, he called to her one afternoon, can I speak with you? She set down the bridle she had been oiling and followed him into the barn, away from where the children were playing. What is it? Winter is coming, Jacob said. The barn will not be warm enough, not for the children and especially not for your grandmother. I want you all to move into the house. Elara shook her head immediately. No, you have done too much already. We cannot take your home. You would not be taking it. It is a big house, 4 bedrooms. I built it hoping for a family someday, though that has not happened yet. I use 1 room. You could have the others. There is a good stove, a real kitchen. It is proper shelter. People will talk, Elara said carefully. It could cause trouble for you. Let them talk, Jacob said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. I do not care what narrow-minded fools think. I care that Emma and Ethan stay warm, that Naomi can recover in comfort, that you do not have to sleep in a barn like livestock. Elara studied him for a long moment. Why do you care so much? Please tell me truly. Jacob took a breath, knowing he was about to cross a line he could not uncross. Because you matter to me. All of you do, but especially you. I know it is complicated. I know there are 1,000 reasons it is foolish, but I cannot help how I feel. And how do you feel? Elara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Like I have been waiting for you, Jacob said honestly. Like that night you showed up in the rain was not chance but fate. Like maybe all the lonely years I have spent building this ranch were so that, when you needed help, I would have something to offer. Elara's eyes filled with tears. Jacob, I am Paiute. You are white. The law, the society, even the church here would condemn any attachment between us. My people might see me as a traitor. Your people would certainly see you as one. I know, Jacob said, but I also know that what I feel is real. And I think maybe you feel something too. She was quiet for so long that Jacob thought he had ruined everything. Then she reached out and took his hand, the first time they had touched beyond accidental brushes. Her hand was small in his, calloused from work, warm. I do, she whispered. I have been trying not to. I have been telling myself it is just gratitude, just relief at being safe. But it is more than that. When I see you with my children, when you speak so gently to my grandmother, when you work beside me and treat me as an equal, I feel things I thought I would never feel again. Jacob squeezed her hand gently. Then let us take it slow. Let us see where this leads, but first, let your family be warm and safe. Move into the house. We will figure out the rest as we go. Elara nodded, and Jacob saw hope bloom in her face, fragile but real. The move happened the next day. Jacob gave Elara and the children the 2 bedrooms on the east side of the house, with Naomi in the room nearest the central fireplace for warmth. He kept his own room and turned his parents' old room into a common space. It felt right, having people in the house, hearing children's laughter echo through the halls, smelling cooking that was not his own rough fare. Lara proved to be an excellent cook, creating meals from simple ingredients that were far better than anything Jacob had managed on his own. She combined her traditional knowledge with the ingredients available, making stews rich with herbs, bread that was somehow lighter and more flavorful, roasted vegetables that even the children ate without complaint. Emma and Ethan began to flourish. With regular meals and warmth, the hollows left their cheeks, and they grew energetic, curious, full of questions. Jacob found himself teaching them about ranch work, showing Ethan how to feed the chickens without getting pecked, teaching Emma how to brush the horses properly. Their laughter became the soundtrack of his days. Naomi, too, improved under the doctor's care and with proper food and warmth. Her cough eased, her strength returned, and she began sitting in the kitchen in the afternoons, working on beadwork that she said was traditional to her people. She spoke little English, but she and Jacob communicated through smiles and gestures, and sometimes Elara would translate stories the old woman told of the old days, before the white settlers came, when her people had lived freely across this land. Jacob found himself learning about Paiute culture, their deep connection to the land, their sophisticated understanding of the desert environment, their rich oral traditions. He shared stories of his own childhood, his parents, his struggles to build the ranch. Slowly, bridges were built, not just between him and Elara, but between their worlds. The love growing between them was inevitable, a slow burn that warmed both their hearts. It started with looks that lasted a little too long, hands that touched and lingered, voices that softened when speaking to each other. Jacob found excuses to be near Elara, and she found reasons to seek him out. One evening, about a month after they had moved into the house, Jacob and Elara found themselves alone in the kitchen after the children had gone to bed and Naomi had retired. They were washing dishes together, a comfortable domesticity that felt natural. "Jacob," Elara said quietly, "I need to tell you something." He set down the plate he was drying. "What is it?" "I am afraid," she admitted. "Afraid of what we are becoming to each other, afraid of what it will mean. I have lost so much already. My husband, my home, my people's way of life. If I give my heart to you and something happens, I do not know if I could bear it." Jacob turned to face her fully. "I am afraid too. I have been alone for so long, I had almost forgotten what it felt like to want more. But Elara, I think sometimes the greatest courage is allowing yourself to hope to love, even when you know it might hurt. Your people will hate you for choosing me," she said. "Some might," Jacob agreed. "But the ones who matter, the ones whose opinions I care about, they will understand. And if they do not, then I will know they never truly knew me." "My grandmother says you have an honest spirit," Elara said with a small smile. "She says the ancestors sent you to us." "What do you say?" Jacob asked. Elara reached up and touched his face gently, her fingertips tracing his jaw. "I say that I am falling in love with you, Jacob Isaiah, and it terrifies me and thrills me in equal measure." Jacob covered her hand with his own. "I am already in love with you, Elara Nightwind. Have been for weeks now, maybe since that first night in the rain." She laughed softly, a sound like music. "That is foolish. I was half drowned and desperate." "You were brave," Jacob corrected. "You were a mother protecting her children, a woman refusing to give up. You were beautiful." Elara rose on her toes and kissed him then. A soft, sweet kiss that held promise and hope, and the beginning of something neither could quite name. Jacob wrapped his arms around her, careful and gentle, and kissed her back, pouring all his feelings into that moment. When they parted, both were breathless and Elara was crying, but they were good tears, tears of relief and joy. "We will face whatever comes together," Jacob promised. "I do not know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." "Yes," Elara whispered. "Yes, together." The winter deepened, and with it, the relationship between Jacob and Elara grew stronger. They were careful in public, aware of the scrutiny they would face, but in the privacy of the ranch, they allowed their love to bloom. They would sit together in the evenings, talking for hours after the children slept, sharing their hopes and dreams, their fears and sorrows. Jacob learned about Elara's childhood, growing up in the traditional ways, learning to gather pine nuts and seeds, to weave baskets, to read the signs of the desert. She spoke of her marriage, which had been arranged but had grown into genuine affection, and the pain of her husband's death. She spoke of the slow erosion of her people's rights, the broken treaties, the casual cruelties of the reservation system. Elara learned about Jacob's loneliness, the way he had poured himself into building his ranch after his father's death, using work to avoid the emptiness of his life. She learned about his mother's kindness, his father's quiet strength, the values they had instilled in him. She saw the goodness in him, the integrity that made him help a stranger in the rain, that made him open his home to her family. They were sitting together by the fire one January evening when Emma approached them, her young face serious. "Are you and Mr. Jacob going to get married?" She asked Elara directly, with the bluntness of children. Elara and Jacob exchanged glances. They had not discussed marriage explicitly, though it had been an unspoken possibility hovering between them. "Would that bother you if we did?" Elara asked carefully. Emma considered this. "No, Mr. Jacob is nice. He makes you smile, and Ethan really likes him." "What about you?" Jacob asked. "Do you like me?" "Yes," Emma said simply. "You are kind to Mama and to Grandmother, and you let me ride the horses." After Emma had returned to playing with her brother, Elara turned to Jacob. "She raises a good question." "She does," Jacob agreed. "Elara, I know we have not talked about this directly, but I want a future with you. I want to marry you if you will have me. I want to raise Emma and Ethan as my own, to care for Naomi, to build a life together. The law would recognize our marriage, but society would not approve," Elara said. "There could be consequences." "I know," Jacob said, "but I also know that I love you more than I fear what others might think or do. If you want this, if you want me, then we will make it work." Elara was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice was firm. "Yes. I want this. I want you. I want to be your wife." Jacob felt joy surge through him. He took her hands in his. "Then we will do it right. We will go to the preacher, file the papers, make it legal and binding. Let anyone who has a problem with it come talk to me directly." They were married on a cold February morning in 1879, in a small ceremony at the ranch with Dr. Sullivan and his wife as witnesses. The preacher had been reluctant until Jacob made it clear that he would find someone else if necessary, someone who believed that love was more important than prejudice. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Emma and Ethan standing with their mother and Naomi watching with tears of joy. Jacob slipped a simple gold band on Elara's finger, and she gave him one she had traded her beadwork for. They exchanged vows, promising to love and honor each other, to face whatever challenges came as one. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Jacob kissed his bride gently, aware of the children watching, and felt more complete than he ever had in his life. The reaction from town was mixed, as expected. Some people refused to do business with Jacob anymore, their prejudices too deep to overcome. Others, decent folks who valued character over color, continued to treat him fairly. Dr. Sullivan remained a good friend, along with a few ranchers in the area who had come to respect Jacob's work ethic and integrity. There were ugly moments. Someone painted slurs on Jacob's barn one night, and he had to scrub them off before the children saw. A group of men from town rode out once to talk sense into him, but Jacob met them with his rifle in hand and a quiet determination that made it clear he would defend his family. They left without incident, but the threat had been real. Through it all, Elara was strong. She held her head high when they went to town together, ignored the stares and whispers, and focused on building their life. She proved herself invaluable to the ranch, her skills complementing Jacob's, her knowledge of the land and animals equal to his own. The ranch began to thrive in ways it never had when Jacob worked it alone. Emma and Ethan adapted quickly to calling Jacob Papa, and he loved them fiercely, teaching them to read and write, to ride and rope, to understand both the world they lived in and the heritage of their mother's people. Naomi became like a second mother to him, teaching him words in Paiute, sharing her wisdom, treating him like the grandson she had never had. Spring came, turning the desert into a brief paradise of wildflowers and green growth. The ranch prospered. Jacob's cattle herd grew, his horses gained a reputation for quality, and orders came in from as far away as Salt Lake City. The money he made, he saved carefully, always aware that the security of his family depended on his success. One warm evening in April, Elara came to Jacob with news that made his heart soar. "I am with child," she told him, her hand on her still flat belly. "Our child." Jacob pulled her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "Are you happy?" he asked, needing to know. "So happy," she assured him. "I did not think I would have another baby, did not think I would know this joy again. You have given me so much, Jacob. A home, safety, love. Now we will have a child of our own. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Elara remained active and strong, working alongside Jacob until he insisted she take it easier in the later months. Emma was excited to have a baby brother or sister, and Ethan was curious, asking endless questions about where babies came from and how they grew. In late November, as the weather turned cold again, Elara went into labor. Dr. Sullivan came to attend her, and Jacob paced the floor anxiously, holding Emma and Ethan as they waited. Naomi was with Elara, along with the doctor's wife, who was an experienced midwife. Hours passed, and Jacob prayed harder than he ever had. He could not lose Elara, not now, not when they had built such a beautiful life together. Finally, as dawn broke, he heard the strong cry of a newborn baby. Dr. Sullivan emerged, smiling. "You have a son," he announced. "A healthy boy, and your wife is doing well." Jacob rushed in to find Elara exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in soft blankets. "Meet your son," she said softly. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he opened his eyes, they were a deep brown like his mother's. He was perfect, absolutely perfect. Jacob touched the tiny hand and felt the baby's fingers curl around his thumb. "What should we name him?" Elara asked. They had discussed names but not settled on one. Jacob looked at his son and thought of all the blessings this child represented, the joining of two worlds, the proof that love could bridge any divide. "Joshua," he said. "Joshua Isaiah, if that is all right with you." "Joshua," Elara repeated, trying it out. "Yes, it is perfect." Emma and Ethan were allowed in to meet their baby brother, and their wonder and gentleness brought tears to Jacob's eyes. Naomi held the baby and spoke a blessing in Paiute, asking the ancestors to watch over him and guide him. It was a moment of pure joy, untainted by the hardships they had faced. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to prosper, and Jacob built additions to the house, making it larger and more comfortable. He built a separate cottage for Naomi, respecting her need for some independence while keeping her close. She remained spry and active well into her 70s, a beloved figure to her great-grandchildren. Emma grew into a beautiful young woman, intelligent and strong-willed like her mother. She learned both Paiute traditions from Naomi and Elara, an American education from Jacob and the school he arranged for her to attend. She eventually married a kind man, a school teacher who saw her for who she was and loved her without reservation. Ethan became a skilled horseman and cattleman, working the ranch alongside Jacob. He inherited Jacob's patience and Elara's intuition with animals, and by the time he was 20, he was Jacob's full partner in running the operation. He, too, married well, to a girl from a neighboring ranch whose family had always been friendly to Jacob despite his controversial marriage. Joshua grew up surrounded by love, learning both English and Paiute, understanding that he came from two worlds and belonged fully to both. He was clever and curious, with his mother's warm heart and his father's steady determination. When he was old enough, he became an advocate for native rights, using his unique position to bridge communities and fight against injustice. Jacob and Elara had two more children over the years, a daughter they named Grace, and another son they called Daniel. The house that Jacob had built hoping for a family was filled with laughter and love, exactly as he had dreamed. There were still challenges, still moments when prejudice reared its ugly head. But Jacob and Elara faced everything together, their love the foundation that supported them through every storm. They became a fixture in the community, respected by many, a living example that love could transcend the artificial boundaries society tried to impose. As Jacob grew older, his dark hair turning gray and then white, his face weathering further under the sun. He would often sit on his porch in the evening with Elara beside him, watching the sun set over the red rocks and feel profound gratitude. The young woman who had appeared in the rain that November night had brought not just herself, but hope, love, and a future richer than anything he could have imagined. Elara would take his hand in these moments, her own hair now streaked with silver, her face lined but still beautiful to him. They would sit in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from decades of companionship, listening to the sounds of their grandchildren playing in the yard, the lowing of cattle, the wind moving through the grass. "You ever regret it?" Jacob asked one evening when they were both in their 60s. "Choosing this life, choosing me. I know it was not easy." Elara turned to him with the smile that still made his heart skip. "Never. Not for a single moment. You saved my life, Jacob, and then you gave me a life worth living. You loved my children as your own, honored my grandmother, respected my people. You are the best man I have ever known." "I am the lucky one," Jacob said. "That night when I saw you in the rain, I thought I was just offering shelter. I did not know I was finding my other half, my true home." "We found each other," Elara corrected, "and we built something beautiful together." Their ranch had grown over the years into one of the most successful in the region, but more than that, it had become a safe haven for others who needed help. Jacob and Elara had taken in several other native families over the years, offering work and shelter, helping them navigate the difficult realities of living in a world that did not always welcome them. The ranch had a reputation as a place where people were judged by their character, not their heritage. Naomi lived to the remarkable age of 83, passing peacefully in her sleep with her family around her. Her funeral was attended by dozens of people, both native and white, all of whom had been touched by her wisdom and kindness. She was buried on a hill overlooking the ranch, in accordance with Paiute traditions, and Jacob made sure her grave was always tended. Emma had given them 5 grandchildren, Ethan 4 and Joshua 3, with Grace and Daniel adding their own children to the growing family. The family gatherings were loud, chaotic, wonderful affairs with children of mixed heritage playing together, learning both English and Paiute, eating food that blended traditions, growing up in a world that was slowly, painfully, beginning to change. Jacob taught all his grandchildren the same lesson his parents had taught him. See people as people, help when you can, stand up for what is right even when it is hard. He told them the story of how he met their grandmother, how a moment of simple decency had led to the greatest love of his life. Elara taught them about their native heritage, the history that was being forgotten, the traditions that were fading, the injustices that were still being perpetrated. She made sure they knew they came from a proud people with a rich culture, that they should never be ashamed of who they were. Together, they created a legacy that extended far beyond the boundaries of their ranch. As Jacob entered his 70s, his body began to slow. The decades of hard work took their toll, and he had to hand over more and more of the daily operations to Ethan and Joshua. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Elara only deepened with time. They celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary with all their children and grandchildren present. It was a summer day in 1909, and the ranch had never looked better. Tables were laden with food, music filled the air, and children ran everywhere in a happy chaos. Jacob stood to give a speech, his hand trembling slightly as he held his glass. 30 years ago, I married the love of my life. People told us it would not work, that the differences between us were too great. But what they did not understand is that love does not see differences as barriers but as bridges. Elara brought me not just herself but a whole new world, a new way of seeing, a richness I never knew existed. She gave me children and grandchildren, purpose and joy. She made my house a home and my life worth living. I am the luckiest man who ever lived because that rainy night, she came to my barn looking for shelter, and I was wise enough to say yes. There was not a dry eye in the gathering as everyone raised their glasses. Elara stood beside her husband, her arm around his waist, supporting him as she always had. "And I am lucky," she said, her voice still strong, "because when I was at my lowest point, scared and desperate, I found not just shelter but a man who saw past my skin to my heart. Jacob has been my rock, my partner, my love for 3 decades. He has shown me that goodness exists, that not all bridges are burned, that hope is never foolish. Together we built something that will outlast us, a family that carries both our legacies forward." The celebration lasted long into the night, filled with laughter and stories, music and dancing. Jacob danced with Elara, moving slowly but still gracefully, and felt nothing but contentment. The final years of Jacob's life were peaceful. He spent his days sitting on the porch, sometimes working on small projects, often just watching the world go by. Elara was always nearby, still active, still strong, still beautiful to him. They would talk for hours or sit in comfortable silence, their love requiring no words. He lived to see Joshua successfully fight for several legal reforms that improved conditions for Native peoples in Utah. He saw Emma become a published author, writing about the experiences of mixed families in the West. He saw Ethan expand the ranch to over 1,000 acres, making it one of the most prosperous in the territory. He saw Grace become a teacher, educating children of all backgrounds. He saw Daniel become a doctor, serving communities that had little access to medical care. He lived to hold his first great-grandchild, a tiny girl with Elara's eyes, and felt the circle of life complete. In the spring of 1912, as the wildflowers bloomed across the desert, Jacob Isaiah passed away peacefully in his sleep, Elara holding his hand. He was 76 years old and had lived a full, rich life beyond anything he could have imagined that rainy night when a desperate woman appeared at his barn. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people, native and white, rich and poor, all whose lives he had touched. They spoke of his kindness, his integrity, his courage in standing up for what was right. They spoke of his love for his wife, the way he had treated her children as his own, the family he had built. They spoke of him as a good man, which was all he had ever wanted to be. Elara lived another 8 years, staying on the ranch she and Jacob had built together, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had been blessed with 2 great loves in her life, her first husband and Jacob, and that was more than most people ever got. She spent her remaining years teaching, preserving Paiute traditions and stories, making sure the younger generations knew where they came from. She spoke often of Jacob, keeping his memory alive, telling stories of their love to anyone who would listen. When she passed away in 1920 at the age of 62, from pneumonia that her aging body could not fight off, she was buried beside Jacob on the hill overlooking the ranch, next to Naomi. The 3 headstones stood together, marking 3 lives that had intertwined to create something beautiful. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations. The story of Jacob and Elara became family legend, told and retold, a reminder of where they came from and the values that built their legacy. The barn where Elara first took shelter was preserved, eventually becoming a museum of sorts, showcasing the history of the family and the region. In that barn, hanging on the wall, was a photograph taken in 1905, when such technology was still relatively new in the region. It showed Jacob and Elara standing together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, everyone smiling. Jacob's hand was on Elara's shoulder, and she was leaning into him slightly, the comfort and love between them evident even in the still image. Below the photograph was a plaque that told their story. How a rancher offered his barn to a homeless native woman, how she brought her family the next morning, how that single act of kindness blossomed into one of the greatest love stories the West had ever seen. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand before that photograph and marvel that they existed because of that rainy night, because one man chose compassion over indifference, because one woman dared to hope for help, because two people from different worlds chose love over fear. The land that Jacob had worked so hard to build his ranch on remained beautiful, the red rocks still turning gold in the morning sun, the wildflowers still blooming each spring. The house stood strong, expanded and updated over the years but maintaining its character, still filled with family, still echoing with the laughter of children. And sometimes on rainy nights, when the wind howled and the thunder rolled, the descendants of Jacob and Elara would look out at the barn and remember the beginning of it all, when a woman appeared in the rain, and a man said yes to helping a stranger, never knowing that he was saying yes to his future, to a love that would transcend time, prejudice, and death itself. The legacy of Jacob Isaiah and Elara Nightwind Isaiah lived on in every descendant who carried their blood, in every person who heard their story and was inspired to choose compassion, in every act of kindness that bridged divides. They had proven that love was stronger than hate, that family was more than blood, that the courage to stand against prejudice was always worthwhile. Their story became part of the history of the American West, not the sanitized version often told, but the real one, complicated and difficult, beautiful and hopeful. It was a story that needed to be told, about two people who refused to let the world dictate who they could love, who built a life together against all odds, who created something that would last long after they were gone. In the end, that rainy November night in 1878 had been the beginning not just of a love story but of a legacy. When Jacob Isaiah offered his barn to Elara Nightwind, when she brought her family the following morning, neither of them knew they were starting something that would echo through generations. They were just two people trying to survive, finding each other in the darkness, holding on and refusing to let go. And that, perhaps, is what made their story so powerful. It was not grand or dramatic in its beginning, just simple human kindness meeting desperate need. But from that simple beginning grew something extraordinary, a testament to the power of love, the importance of compassion, and the beautiful things that can happen when we open our hearts to those who need help. The ranch still stood, the family still thrived, and the story of Jacob and Elara was still told, generation after generation, a reminder that the most important things in life are the connections we make, the people we choose to love, and the legacy we leave behind. They had lived, loved, suffered, triumphed, and created something that would never die as long as there were descendants to remember them and people willing to listen to their story. And in the red rocks of southern Utah, where the desert meets the sky and the wildflowers bloom each spring, the memory of a rancher and a native woman who loved each other against all odds continued to live on, eternal as the land itself, beautiful as the sunrise, powerful as the storm that brought them together.